My name is Elias Thorne. For 12 years, I lived my life according to a principle of perfect equilibrium. I am a forensic accountant by trade, a man hired to find the missing pennies in a billion-dollar merger, the man who spots the anomaly in the chaotic sea of data. I believe that the universe, much like a ledger, must always balance. For every debit, a credit. For every action, a consequence. I applied the same philosophy to my marriage with Elena. We were a study in contrasts that I believed created a harmonious whole. I was the silence. She was the sound. I was the structured grid of a spreadsheet. She was the unpredictable, organic shape of wet clay spinning on a wheel. Elena was a ceramicist. Her studio, a converted barn behind our coastal home, was her sanctuary. The rhythmic thrumming of her pottery wheel and the earthy scent of damp kaolin clay were the background noise of my happiness. We had a daughter, Maya, who was 7. She had my eyes, but Elena's wild, untamable spirit. Our life felt secure. It felt audited and approved. I was the provider, the steady hand, the ground beneath their feet. I never imagined that the ground was actually a fault line waiting to snap. The discrepancy didn't appear in a bank statement or a tax return. It appeared in the silence. It started with the late firings. Elena began spending her evenings in the studio, claiming she had a massive commission for a boutique hotel chain. It's high stakes, Elias, she'd say, her eyes darting away from mine, wiping clay dust from her hands. I need to be in the zone. Don't wait up. I respected her process. I retreated to my study, checking market trends, content in the knowledge that she was just 50 feet away in the backyard. But then came the sensory shifts. She started buying new clothes, not the comfortable linen smocks she usually wore, but silk blouses and sharp, tailored blazers. She began wearing a perfume I didn't recognize, something smoky, with notes of oud and jasmine, far removed from her usual vanilla scent. It's for the client meetings, she told me one Tuesday, catching me staring. Image is everything in the art world. Elias, I nodded. It made logical sense. But my gut, usually reserved for sensing embezzlement in corporate files, began to tighten. The catalyst was Julian Vance. Julian was our neighbor, living in the glass and steel monstrosity of a house that overlooked the cliffs next to ours. He was a venture capitalist, the kind of man who spoke in buzzwords and moved with the restless energy of someone constantly chasing the next adrenaline high. He drove a vintage Porsche, threw loud parties, and had a smile that didn't quite reach his shark-like eyes. We were cordial. We'd speak at the mailbox. He'd joke about my boring job. I'd politely tolerate his stories about his latest unicorn startup, a tech firm called Nebula that was set to launch an IPO in 3 months. The fracture happened on a Thursday. I had come home early, a migraine forcing me away from the office. The house was empty. Maya was at a sleepover. I assumed Elena was in the studio, but the wheel was silent. I walked into our bedroom to lie down and saw her phone on the nightstand. Elena never left her phone. It was practically glued to her hand these days. It buzzed. A single notification lit up the screen. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from a secure, encrypted messaging app, the kind my clients used when they were trying to hide assets offshore. The preview was disabled, but the sender's name was simply J. I am not a man who snoops. I am a man who investigates. There is a difference. Snooping is emotional. Investigation is procedural. I sat on the edge of the bed. I knew her passcode. It was the year we bought this house. I unlocked the phone. The app required a second biometric scan, but Elena, in her artistic carelessness, had set the backup password as Maya's birthday. I was in. The chat log wasn't short. It scrolled back 6 months. J was Julian. The timestamp on the latest message was from 10 minutes ago. The suite at the Obsidian Hotel is prepped. Champagne is on ice. Leave the accountant with his spreadsheets. Come be alive with me. I scrolled up, my heart maintaining a slow, terrifyingly steady beat. I read about their trysts. I read about how I was suffocatingly dull, a gray man who sucked the color out of her life. I read about Julian's promise to take her to Paris once Nebula went public, how they would leave me and the suburban rot behind. But then I found something else, something that shifted my pain into cold. Hard calculation. Julian had sent her a photo of a document. It was a preliminary financial report for Nebula. Underneath it, he wrote, "Don't worry about the money, babe. I'm moving the debt into the shell cores in the Caymans before the audit next week. By the time the public buys the stock, we'll be cashed out and gone." The gray man wouldn't even know how to read these numbers. I stared at the image. I zoomed in. Julian wasn't just stealing my wife. He was committing massive securities fraud. He was inflating the valuation of his company by hiding liabilities in ghost entities. He was building a castle on a foundation of lies, and he was planning to use the stolen proceeds to run away with Elena. I heard the front door open. I placed the phone back exactly as it was. I smoothed the bedspread. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower, stepping inside just as Elena called out my name. "I'm in here," I shouted over the water, my voice steady. When I came out, wrapped in a towel, she was there, looking flustered, smelling of that smoky jasmine perfume. "I have to run out," she said, breathless. "The kiln! I need to buy a specific glaze from the supplier in the city before they close." "Of course," I said, offering a thin, tight smile. "Drive safe," as she left to meet him at the Obsidian Hotel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went to my study and opened my laptop. The sadness was there, a heavy, drowning weight in my chest, but I compartmentalized it. I locked it away in a mental vault. Now, it was time to work. Phase 1 was data collection. I needed to be thorough. I couldn't just ruin their affair. I had to dismantle their exit strategy. If they left now, they would vanish with millions of dollars of stolen money. I needed to anchor them here until the trap was ready. I began to play the part of the unsuspecting fool. I became even more supportive. I asked Elena about her commission, feigning interest in non-existent pottery pieces. I brought Julian a bottle of scotch as a neighborly gesture, sitting on his deck, listening to him brag about the upcoming IPO. "It's going to be a revolution." "Elias," Julian said, swirling the amber liquid, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. "We're changing the paradigm." "I'm sure you are," I said, sipping my water. "The numbers must be incredible. Astronomical." He grinned. "You should buy in, buddy. Family and friends discount." "I'll think about it," I said. While he drank, I noted the IP address of his home network. Later that night, utilizing the skills I'd learned from the white hat hackers at my firm, I bypassed his firewall. It was embarrassingly easy. His password was his own last name followed by #1. I gained access to his private cloud drive. What I found was a forensic accountant's dream and a nightmare for the SEC. Julian was leveraging Nebula against non-existent assets. He was falsifying user growth numbers. He was indeed moving debt into 3 shell companies, Vortex Holdings, Blue J Ltd., and Apex Ventures. I copied everything, every ledger, every email, every incriminating text message between him and his conspirators. But I didn't release it yet. Timing is the most critical variable in any equation. The Nebula launch party, the Galactic Gala, was scheduled for Friday night, 2 months from the day I found the texts. That was the deadline. That was when Julian planned to announce the IPO price, turning his worthless paper shares into gold. That was the night he and Elena planned to leave. I saw their itinerary in Elena's travel app, to one-way tickets to Zurich departing at 1:00 a.m., 3 hours after the gala. I had 8 weeks to prepare my own presentation. During those weeks, I slowly secured my own perimeter. I moved my liquid assets into trust funds for Maya that I controlled exclusively. I updated my will, I documented Elena's absences, her spending, and her neglect of her daughter. I built a custody case that was ironclad. I watched them. I watched the looks they exchanged at dinner parties, the brush of hands that they thought was subtle. It was nauseating, a physical sickness that I swallowed down every single day. They looked at me with pity. The boring husband, the anchor dragging them down. They didn't know the anchor was actually a depth charge. The night of the gala arrived. It was held at the city's sleekest convention center. The theme was future forward. The room was bathed in violet and neon blue light. Champagne flowed like water. I wore a tuxedo that I had tailored specifically for this night. I looked sharp, precise. Elena wore a dress of shimmering silver, looking like a trophy waiting to be claimed. She squeezed my hand as we entered. "You okay?" she asked. "You seem intense, just focused," I said. "I want to see Julian's big moment." "It's going to be great for him," she said, a little too enthusiastically. We mingled. I saw Julian across the room, surrounded by investors and tech journalists. He looked like a king. He caught Elena's eye and gave a subtle wink. She squeezed my hand again, likely out of guilt or perhaps excitement for her escape. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Julian took the stage. A massive LED screen behind him displayed the Nebula logo. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian boomed, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight, we don't just launch a company. We launch a legacy. We have built something from nothing. We have defied the laws of gravity." The crowd cheered. "I want to walk you through our journey," Julian said, clicking a remote. "Let's look at the growth." The screen shifted to a graph. A hockey stick curve going up and up. I checked my watch. 9:15 p.m. I slipped my phone out of my pocket. I had written a script, a simple executable program that I had embedded into the presentation server earlier that day. I had gained access thanks to Julian, sending the presentation to his personal email, the one I had hacked for a final review. I pressed execute. On stage, Julian was pointing to the revenue column. "As you can see, our quarter-over-quarter yield is..." The screen flickered. The graph disappeared. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. It was raw, ugly, and undeniable. It showed the transfers to Vortex Holdings. It showed the massive debt load. It showed the fabricated user data highlighted in bright, damning red. The room went silent. Julian laughed nervously. "Ah, looks like a technical glitch. Wrong slide." "One moment." He clicked the remote frantically. The slide changed. But it wasn't the graph. It was the chat log. Specifically, the conversation from yesterday. "Julian, once the stock hits $40, I dump my shares. We take the money. We hit the airport. The company will implode by Monday, but we'll be in Switzerland. Elena, I just need to get through the night with Elias. He suspects nothing. He's such a simple man. I can't wait to burn this life down." The silence in the room was no longer confused. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. A gasp rippled through the crowd. I felt Elena's hand turn to ice in mine. She dropped it, as if burned. "What is this?" Someone shouted from the front row. It was Julian's lead investor. Julian was frozen on stage, a deer in the headlights of his own destruction. He looked at the screen, then at the tech booth, screaming, "Cut the feed! Cut it now!" But the feed didn't cut. I had locked the system. Then, the slide changed one last time. It was a live stream from the lobby of the convention center. Walking through the glass doors were 6 federal agents wearing FBI windbreakers, flanked by officers from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I had sent the full dossier, the auditor's correction, as I called it, to the authorities 3 days ago. I had told them to wait for the gala. I told them that was when the flight risk would be highest. Julian saw the agents on the screen. He saw them entering the back of the ballroom in real life. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made everyone wince. He tried to run toward the backstage exit, but security was already there. The chaos that ensued was a masterpiece of kinetic energy. Shouting, flashbulbs popping, the frantic murmur of 100 ruined reputations. I turned to Elena. She was pale, trembling, her silver dress catching the chaotic lights. She looked at the screen, then at Julian being handcuffed, and finally, slowly, she turned to me. Her eyes were wide with a horror I had never seen before. She realized, in that second, that I wasn't just an observer. I was the author. Elias? She whispered. What? What is happening? I looked at her, my expression calm, my pulse steady. An audit, I said softly. The books didn't balance, Elena. I corrected them. She stepped back. You did this? You wanted excitement, I said, adjusting my cufflinks. You wanted to leave the gray life behind. You're free now. Julian is going to prison for a very long time. The assets he promised you don't exist. And I have already filed for emergency custody of Maya based on the intent to flee the country and child endangerment evident in your messages. She reached for me, tears finally spilling over, ruining her makeup. Elias, please. It was a mistake. I was confused. He manipulated me. I stepped out of her reach. No, you were calculated. You just weren't good at math. I turned my back on her. I walked through the stunned crowd, past the investors shouting into their phones, past the reporters scrambling for a quote. I walked right past Julian as the agents marched him out. He looked at me, his eyes burning with hate, but he said nothing. He knew. He knew he had underestimated the structural integrity of the man he called boring. I walked out of the convention center and into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the harbor, shimmering and chaotic. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. Home, I said. I have a daughter to wake up. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. The scandal was national news. Nebula collapsed before the market even opened. Julian was denied bail. Elena was left with nothing, no lover, no money, no home. The courts granted me full custody, citing the overwhelming evidence of her plan to abandon the jurisdiction. She moved into a small apartment across town. She tries to call sometimes. I let it go to voicemail. I sat on the back porch this morning. The studio behind the house is empty now. I sold the kiln and the wheel. The silence is different. It's no longer the heavy silence of secrets. It's the clean, crisp silence of a fresh start. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. I pulled up my personal ledger. Debits, 12 years of marriage. Credits, freedom. Maya. Dignity. The balance was positive. My name is Elias Thorne. I am a forensic accountant. And for the first time in a long time, the numbers finally add up.